Welcome to my presentation on U.S. contract airmail. My comments will be divided into two parts. In this first part, I'll give a brief review of the history of the U.S. airmail, from the beginning of the government-scheduled airmail service in 1918 and the development of a transcontinental route in the 1920s. This was followed by the privatization of airmail in the mid-1920s, a brief reversal in 1934, and reprivatization a few months later. Then I'll discuss contract airmail covers in some detail, touching on departure cachets, postmarks, and the process of ordering first flight covers. So let's get started. Following successful experimental airmail flights in 1911 to 16, regularly scheduled government airmail service was begun between Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York in May 1918. By 1920, the service was extended to include a transcontinental trunk route from New York to San Francisco. The aerial navigation of the day was very crude, so night flying was out of the question at first. The mail traveled by plane during the day and by train at night. By the early 1920s, a series of large concrete arrows and beacons on towers were spaced along the route to aid navigation. This allowed scheduled transcontinental mail trips flying day and night to begin in August 1923. Today, the lighting portion of this novel navigation system has long since been dismantled, leaving only the large concrete arrows to puzzle many onlookers. In 1924, the Coolidge administration took the necessary steps to privatize America's airmail. A bill formerly known as the Contract Airmail Act of 1925 was introduced by Congressman M. Clyde Kelly. This act, more commonly known as the Kelly Bill, became law in March 1925. It would significantly alter the course of commercial aviation in America, which was then in the doldrums. Initially, the government continued to run the transcontinental airmail route. The private routes created by the Kelly Bill were shorter feeder lines that connected with the government route. The feeder lines were called contract airmail routes, or CAMs for short, and the government solicited private party bids to run them. Winners of the contracts were thus assured a regular income stream for carrying airmail and did not have to rely on passengers to stay in business. The CAM routes were numbered sequentially from 1 in the order in which they were created by the Post Office Department. This was not the order in which the routes actually went into operation, however. For example, the first CAM routes to begin were CAMs 6 and 7 in February 1926. The inauguration of each route, as well as later extensions or other changes, generated a group of souvenir first flight covers known as CAM covers. The cover at the top is a CAM 11 route inauguration cover, and that at the bottom is for the addition of a new city to the already established CAM 3. In 1927, the government's transcontinental route was split into two sections and converted into two CAM routes. The eastern section, Chicago to New York, became CAM 17, and the western section, San Francisco to Chicago, became CAM 18. In this airmail route map as of 12/1/27, you can see CAM 17 and 18 shown in red and blue respectively, forming the transcontinental backbone, and all the other CAM routes in green feeding into it. Notice that the inaugural covers from both parts of the transcontinental backbone have transcontinental route in their cachet wording. Cam 17, upper left, was inaugurated on September 1st, and Cam 18, lower right, was inaugurated on July 1st, 1927. When the airlines that owned Cam 17 and 18 merged in 1930, the old transcontinental route again came under the operation of a single entity. Also in 1930, the contracts for two additional transcontinental routes, Cams 33 and 34, were awarded, bringing the total number of transcontinental routes to 3. The new routes, both south of the original transcontinental route, made our airmail system one of the most advanced in the world. Here are representative inaugural covers for the two new routes. Cam 33, called the Southern Transcontinental Route, and Cam 34, called the Mid-Transcontinental Route. In 1920 to 27, the government awarded contracts to private companies for 4 small airmail routes that involved service to a city outside the United States. They were simply called Route 1, 2, 3, etc. Finally, the government, concerned that both French and German carriers were anxious to extend their air service in Latin America, passed a new act, the Kelly Foreign Airmail Act of 1928. In a process similar to the CAM system, contracts were advertised and awarded to private contractors to carry airmail over routes that began in either Florida or Texas and went south. First, they went to the Caribbean and Central America. Later in the 30s, they extended into South America and across both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. For a time, Pan American Airways, headed by Juan Trippe, won all of these contracts. The routes were called FAM routes and were numbered beginning with 5. Here's a FAM 5 cover carried by Charles Lindbergh on the inaugural flight from Miami to Cristobal Canal Zone in the early part of 1929, and autographed by him. After the Roosevelt administration took over in 1933, there was an investigation into the awarding of CAM contracts by the previous administration. Although no charges were filed, Roosevelt decided that there was enough evidence of collusion to take punitive action. At the behest of Roosevelt, all CAM contracts were canceled, and on February 19, 1934, the carriage of the airmail was turned over to the Army. Here's one of the inaugural covers for the beginning of the Army service. The Army takeover of the airmail system quickly proved to be a costly mistake. Flying conditions were bad, it was still winter, the Army airplanes were ill-suited for the task, and the pilots were inexperienced. There were many crashes and several pilot deaths. Public outcry, led by such voices as Eddie Rickenbacker and Charles Lindbergh, forced Roosevelt to quickly reverse course. The routes were reorganized and again awarded to private contractors. The route numbering system started over at 1, and inaugural flights for the new routes first began in May 1934. Here's an inaugural cover from June for AM 28. Route numbers would eventually reach 262 with gaps, not counting 3 temporary experimental routes numbered 1001, 1002, and 2001. The contract airmail routes were discontinued by the Contract Airmail Deregulation Act of 1978. As a matter of convenience, collectors fell into the habit of referring to contract airmail covers from the period prior to the Army Emergency Service as cam covers. That was because many of them bore cachets in which the route number was shown with the prefix cam, C-A-M. Cam 29 shows nicely on the example here. On covers of the post-Army period, that is 1934 to 78, the route number was shown as AM, AM. So they became known as AM covers. Our example in this slide is AM 39. The CAM-AM terminology, however, can be problematic for the late CAM covers. That's because the Post Office Department's route terminology changed from CAM to AM about December 1930. So while the CAM cover in this slide is dated April 1931, almost 3 years before the first period ended, the route number is given as AM 19. The safest way to differentiate a CAM cover from an AM cover is by the postmark date. If a given first flight cover is dated prior to 1934, it's a CAM cover, regardless of how the route number on the cachet reads. Now let's look at the principal features of CAM covers. On the front is the departure city cachet, in this case a simple double circle with text, the postmark, and an address, plus of course the postage. On the back there can be a receiver mark and possibly transit marks. First let's focus on the departure city cachet. Cachet design and uses evolved over time, but all along the design tended to include reference to the route by either route name or number. CAM route names contain the names of important cities on the route. Our example in this slide is from CAM 8, with the route name Seattle to Los Angeles showing at the bottom of the cachet. Early cam cover dispatch cachets were of a design that was general by both route and city. What do we mean by that? Let's take cachet style B2, of which there are 3 examples in this slide. First, general by route. The CAM 11 cachet on the left was changed to a CAM 8 cachet in the center simply by changing the route name at the bottom. And general by city, the CAM 8 cachet for Los Angeles in the center was changed to a CAM 8 cachet for Medford by changing the city name in the center. The early cachets, styles A, B, and C, included both the time and date of the inaugural flight. Style A, seen on CAM 6 and 7 covers, includes both the dispatch and destination cities in the flight. Because of its content and size, the Style A cachet is easily mistaken for a regular postmark. Style C, the other small circular cachet, appeared on CAM 4 covers. Cachet style B1 is a unique style in that its wording made it applicable to 2 routes, CAM 6 and CAM 7 in 1926. At the bottom are the names of 3 cities, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland. CAM 6 ran between Detroit and Cleveland and was called the Detroit to Cleveland route. And CAM 7 ran between Detroit and Chicago and was called the Detroit to Chicago route. So the inclusion of the 3 city names in this cachet encompass both routes. Style B2 had a single route name at the bottom and was the style used for most CAMs that began operation in 1926 and early 1927. Style B3, with route number at the bottom, time in the center, was used only for some of the inaugural covers of CAM 10 in 1926. And style B4, route name at the bottom, no time in the center, saw use only on some CAM 17 covers in 1927. While the usual cachet style during 1926 was style B2, there were exceptions. For two cities, Springfield, Illinois in CAM 2 and Colorado Springs in CAM 12, the Post Office Department granted a special cachet design, style B5, in addition to the standard style. This design included a small plane in the center and a slogan for each city. A similar round cachet containing a city slogan but no small plane, style B6, was granted to Kansas City in CAM 3. The next group of cachets, the D group, continued the concept of being general by both route and city. The cachets consisted of text in a horizontal octagon and was the preferred form for nearly a year, April 1927 to February 1928. There were three style versions. D1, where the route name was included in the text. D2, where the route number was included in the text. And D3, where neither was included in the text. Between May 1928 and January 1929, the use of general cachets for both route and city began to drop off. Only two such styles were used. A large plane in a circle, style E, for cams 17 and 20A, and a small plane with wavy lines trailing it, style F group, for cams 19 and 23. There are four variations of the style F. F1 has the route name at the top and the city name at the bottom with no lines below it. F2 is like F1 except the city name is missing. F3 is a new form with the route number at the top and the city name at the bottom with two lines below it. And finally, Route 4 has the route name at the top and the city name below with two lines below it. Beginning in July 1928, we see a new trend, a cachet of a design general to city only. That is, the design could be used for all the cities on the route, but it was restricted to only a single route. We show three examples here for cams 16, 26, and 32. But in all, there were 8 routes with this type cachet. Finally, in 1930 came the end of the general cachet altogether, and the cachet design became custom for each city. Here we see cachets for El Centro, California in CAM 33 and Buffalo, New York in CAM 27. Dispatch cachets were not universally applied to CAM covers. If a city on a route had received a cachet on a previous occasion, another one would not be issued for any subsequent flights involving that city. The CAM 20 cover here is a good example. The cover was flown from Schenectady, an already existing stop, to newly added city, Rome. Unofficial cachets were sometimes applied to inaugural covers. This was especially true when an official cachet was unavailable, as in the top cover from CAM 9 for Milwaukee. Even when there was an official cachet provided, there could still be a promotional unofficial cachet used as well. In the case of Medford, Oregon, in CAM 8, on the bottom cover, the unofficial cachet on the right was more interesting than the official version. Dispatch city cachets were normally intended to be used as just that, an indicator of the city from which the flight originated. The cancellation was provided by hand stamp or machine CDS. The inclusion of the time and date in the early circular cachets, styles A to F, however, allowed them to be used in other ways. The cachet could itself become the canceller, with or without associated killer bars. Cachets were even employed as a receiver mark on the back or the front. Here's a Dayton dispatch cachet applied to the back in addition to the more conventional CDS receiver postmark. In the early days, the cachet color was not stipulated, and there was usually no variation. The Cam 5 Pasco Washington cachet is an exception, where it comes in red or black. Soon, on some routes like Cam 27, the matter of cachet cover was abused, with multiple colors being used. Presumably, this was to create more demand for the covers. Some routes even had combo cachets consisting of 2 or more colors, prompting the Post Office Department to stipulate that there should only be one color for each city's cachet. Now to postmarks. The postmark date is generally the date of the flight and can be a machine CDS or hand stamped. Both postmarks on this CAM 24 example are from the main post office. Sometimes plans had to be changed at the last minute, causing some or all of the first flight covers to bear a date that didn't correspond to the actual flight date. In this example, from CAM 20, we see 3 different dates applying to the same flight. The inaugural flight from Buffalo to Cleveland was scheduled for December 17, 1927, but bad weather prevented the flight from departing until the 19th, and covers were successively dated until the flight could occur. Some cities set up a post office at the municipal airfield, so some of the airmail could be canceled at the airfield. The postmark from these facilities contained Airmail Field, or AMF. A very scarce type of cancellation containing Airmail Field Motor Truck was applied as a dispatch cancel to some mail leaving Chicago by air on February 21, 1928. Instead of being canceled at either the main post office or the airmail field, it was canceled in the truck en route. Postmark time can be an important indicator of which flight a piece of mail went on. It's very common for inaugural flight covers to carry only one time for a given flight. It's also often true that flights from the same city in opposite directions on the same day have different postmark times. Here's an example for CAM 11. The cover at the top was flown north from Akron and has a postmark time of 11:30 a.m., while the cover below went south and its postmark time is 7:30 a.m. There are exceptions. With the inaugural flights from CAM 16, the postmark times are identical for flights in opposite directions. The Columbus cover at the top is northbound and that below is southbound. Both have the postmark time 6 a.m. Another exception, though uncommon, is multiple postmark times for the same flight. In this CAM 7 Cleveland dispatch example, we see 10 a.m., 12 noon, and 2 p.m. in the cachet or postmark. A receiver mark is an indicator of the place and sometimes the date and time a cover was received. It could be a standard CDS postmark, a general delivery stamp, or as seen earlier, a dispatch city cachet. If the receiver mark is not for the cover's final destination city, it's called a transit mark. Transit marks are often seen on contract airmail covers. That's because these covers often take two trips. First is the flight from the dispatch city to the destination city. Then the cover goes by train to the addressee's return address, which is often in a third city. The CAM 20 cover here is a nice example. It was flown from Rome to Buffalo, New York, given a Buffalo transit mark, then went by train to the sender's return address in Chicago, where it was given a Chicago receiver mark. The receiver mark can be on the front or back or entirely missing. This CAM 27 cover from 1931 was given a general delivery receiver mark on the right front. Now let's look at how the system for obtaining CAM and FAM inaugural flight covers through the post office worked. Upcoming inaugural flights were announced by the Post Office Department, and often notices appeared in the philatelic press. The announcements included the route, cities served, and the flight dates and times, as you can see in this announcement from 1931 for CAM 20. Some flights received very short or no advance notice. The next step was to decide upon the flight or flight leg, where the airplane started, the dispatch city, and where it stopped, the destination city. Most routes had 3 or more stops. Typically, each stop could serve as a dispatch point or a destination point. Let's consider the initiation of CAM 2, a north-south route, initially consisting of 4 cities: St. Louis, Springfield, Peoria, and Chicago. It was possible to order a cover from any of the 12 possible legs of the trip. The northbound legs were St. Louis to Springfield, St. Louis to Peoria via Springfield, St. Louis to Chicago via Springfield and Peoria, Springfield to Peoria, Springfield to Chicago via Peoria, and Peoria to Chicago. The southbound legs were Chicago to Peoria, Chicago to Springfield via Peoria, and Chicago to St. Louis via Peoria and Springfield. Peoria to Springfield, Peoria to St. Louis via Springfield, and Springfield to St. Louis. The cover in this slide, for example, was flown from Peoria to Springfield. Note the use of the Peoria cachet as a canceller on the front and the Springfield dispatch cachet as the receiving mark on the back. This second cover was also flown south from Peoria, but it went all the way to the route's southern terminus at St. Louis. Again, a Peoria dispatch cachet is used as a canceller, but in this case the receiver mark is a St. Louis CDS postmark. The address on the covers could be the orderer's name with his home or business address, or it could be to his name, care of general delivery, or simply to the postmaster in the flight destination city. In any case, the cover would usually be returned to the sender at his return address. The use of general delivery usually caused the post office to apply a general delivery receiver stamp, which would be an important factor in proving the exact flight on which the cover was flown. More about this in Part 2. Autographs of the postmaster and/or pilot could also be requested. Our Cam 2 example here has both, and it's a premium cover since the pilot is Charles Lindbergh. Once one had made the choices outlined above for their covers, the next step was to send the stamped covers and an accompanying note with the appropriate instructions to the postmaster of the dispatch city. The covers were enclosed in an outer cover addressed to the postmaster. Some senders, as in the Cam 15 example shown, marked the flight information right on the cover. Others simply relied on the enclosed note to the postmaster and did not specially mark the covers themselves. Many collectors didn't take the trouble to service their own covers. They relied on a professional cover servicer to do it and bought the covers from them. Professional cover servicers usually obtain covers in their own name to resell, or they would sometimes order them in customers' names. Some of these servicers became well known, and their covers are sought after today by collectors. Edward Warden was one such servicer. Another well-known professional cover servicer was Albert C. Ressler, who sometimes went by A.C. Rowe in East Orange, New Jersey. He was a philatelic publisher and prolific cover servicer. In fact, he was responsible for creating the only covers known for some events. On the other hand, he had a darker side that at one point landed him in jail. Rudolf Dinnebier was one of the greatest of the professional servicers. His high-quality covers were visually attractive and often had the specific flight information printed or stamped on the cover, as seen on this Cam 1 cover.